Asetek has been in the market for about 2 years now, and I know I'm quite late to be making a video on this, but better late than never, right? But before we begin, full disclosure, I reached out to Asetek asking to review their products, and they very graciously provided me with the gear free of cost. There are no terms and conditions, and they only asked for an honest review in return. They don't have an early access to the video, meaning they won't see it before you do, and have no say in my thoughts and opinions. With that said, let's begin. I have said this in one of my videos and I'll say it again. Neither hardware nor software is important, but both are vital. Once a piece of hardware is bought, the software could be improved over time, but not the hardware. And there's a limit to which the software can compensate for. Asetek has nailed both the areas by striking a near perfect balance between the two. But it comes with a cost. Even though the cost is a bit on the higher side, in my opinion, it is justified. Starting with the name, La Prima, meaning the first, as in the first base in the lineup. It is a very strong contender in the sub 12 Nm wheelbase category. In this video, we will only be talking about the base. The wheels and La Prima pedals will have a separate video, as I have a lot to talk about them. And judging by the length of this video, it did not make much sense to squish it all in. Right then, enough chatter, let's get down to business and start with the quick release. When I first saw this quick release mechanism on videos, I instantly jumped to the conclusion that this was not going to be as strong. Or even if it were, it would get loose over time. Pair that with the incident where Lawrence de Sossois yanked the wheel out of its place because of a softer spring put a lot of concerns in my mind. Thankfully, it was limited to a handful of units, which were called back and rectified immediately. Now, on paper it may seem like a very simple no-pin design of the semi-cube quick release, but it cannot be further from the truth. The design is wireless but isn't a Bluetooth or Wi-Fi design like SimMagic Quick Release has. It is wireless, but there's a USB underneath the pins. So a wired, wireless design, but not wireless in terms of Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. This is the revised version and is very solid with literally no flex, rattles or any unusual movements. And I wanted to draw your attention to the details because the craftsmanship is commendable. After connecting the wheel, the gap right here is less than a millimeter. Though I do have a bit of a lingering fear of damaging these exposed spring-loaded pogo pins. Not that the Bluetooth NRG style quick release does not have any, or it cannot be damaged. It's just that since it is exposed, it makes it a bit fragile.
Fragile! Cosa Francesco! Fragile!
Pogo pins are fragile, but because in SimMagic's case, it isn't in front of your eyes, you kind of forget about it. Nevertheless, my advice would be to be a bit careful. With that covered, let's talk about the base. If you are up to the date with the current market scenario, you would be familiar that it often comes down to either picking a bigger base with better details or a budget-friendly base with decent details. But this time there is a middle ground because this base has 22-bit of encoder resolution, so plenty of details for everyone to enjoy, and Asetek's claim that all of their bases can hold their peak torque for 40 seconds. Kudos for transparency. Now at first glance, I was staggered to see the size of this thing as it seemed a bit bigger for a 12 Nm base. It shares its dimensions with the 18 Nm Forte, and the reason being that it can be upgraded to a Forte by a simple PCB and power supply swap. The reason for this, which Asetek stated, was that a lot of people look for an upgrade after a few months of ownership of a sub 12 Nm base. Though this can only be achieved between La Prima and Forte since they share the same motor and dimensions. Invicta has no such thing, otherwise it would have been quite pointless to sell 3 different bases. This feature, however, hasn't been released yet, as they are still figuring out on how to make this process beginner friendly. Because to a hardware enthusiast, swapping the PCB and being gentle with all the wires and stuff can be a piece of cake. The same, however, cannot be said for an average sim racer. As far as I know, there isn't any other manufacturer who has attempted to create something like this, and I'm really looking forward to it. Now, depending on how the process comes out to be, it would still be better than the traditional method of selling your base at a loss and buying another one, right? Anyways, So this base is an entry-level offering from Asetek, but it does not seem like it. This base is like the Damian Wayne of Asetek family, which makes Forte Nightwing and Invicta Batman. Despite Damian being a child, he's perfectly capable of going head to head with a lot of people older and much experienced than him. And such is the case with La Prima. This is the only sub 12 Nm base with 22-bit of resolution and the ability to hold its peak for 40 seconds, which makes it sound like an absolute unit on paper. But is it really? Let's start with the exterior and slowly work our way towards the interior. This is an all aluminum casing except the front cover, which is plastic. The ridges are not here for aesthetic purposes as they serve as a heat sink to dissipate the heat as quickly as possible. And because there are ridges all around, you would expect it to do good in heat management. I played for nearly an hour with an ambient room temperature of 30 degrees Celsius and the maximum which I got was somewhere around 40 degrees. According to this manual, it is common for the base to reach up to 70 degrees or 158 degrees Fahrenheit. It usually gets somewhere between warm and hot during extended sessions running at 90% of its capacity. But that behavior is applicable to any motor running near its rated capacity. As long as it isn't uncomfortably hot to touch, you're fine. Motors with higher torque are expected to perform better in heat management if you are running similar torque levels. For further clarifications, by extended sessions I mean 2 to 3 hours of gaming, during which I could not experience any fading issues. Now whether or not you're going to experience clipping is dependent upon your preferred torque levels. For the majority, it is somewhere between 8 to 12 Nm. I experience clipping as my usual limit exceeds 12 Nm. In here, I was playing around 10.8, which is 90% of its output. If you are going to play at similar levels, irrespective of what sub 12 Nm base you use, I'm sure some frequencies will be clipped as you will be hitting the torque limit quite frequently. Now I'm not going to comment on the physical appearance of the base as looks can be subjective. To me, it's fine. I did not notice the base once after mounting it. And also, the design is functional, so it's alright. There are no buttons on the base at all, and you need this to power it up. Without it, good luck. It doubles as an emergency stop button. Sort of. There is a torque off button as well, which is compatible and provided only with Forte and Invicta. I wasn't sure why an external power button was needed in the first place, as it could very well have been implemented on the backside. To which Asetek responded that sometimes if a game crashes, your wheel would suddenly become a violent helicopter rotor blade. And in such scenarios, it would be very hard to reach behind the base to power it down. Which makes sense. Moving on, mounting options are also great. It can be front, bottom and side mounted. Rather than providing fixed holes, it has these movable T-nuts for bottom mounting. In case you decide not to bottom mount it, you can remove these nuts so it won't rattle while playing. With all of the exterior covered, let's move on to the interior. Before we talk about the motor, let's talk force feedback for a moment because it is genuinely impressive. I have always said that torque isn't everything and what matters are the details. That right there is exactly what it provides. All of the details, whether be it the surface texture or curbs or slipping of tires, each and every single thing is pronounced in a very deliberate yet particular manner. It doesn't mindlessly amplify all the frequencies. It has a way of delivering those forces in a very subtle manner and I quite like it. Now all of this is being provided by a midge motor. Asetek acquired the software, controller and a couple of other things from Granite devices and used as a baseline to develop their products off of it. Does that make it a reskinned Semicube base or even an inspired version? No, not at all. They are very different. Similar to how the 6-liter AMG V12 fitted inside the Pagani Huayra does not make it a Mercedes. In case you directly jump to this part, I'm going to assume that you want a summary of this segment. So here it is. The force feedback is truly magnificent. The details are amazing, the motor is extremely smooth, and it still baffles me that this is a 12 Nm base. Like, comment, subscribe, I'll see you in the next one. Now let's talk about the segment in detail. As usual, I will be talking about the things which I liked and did not like. Since I can only speak for myself, take my statements with a grain of salt. With that said, let's begin. Like I mentioned earlier, this base has a very particular way of delivering the forces. it does not mindlessly amplify the frequencies to give you a false sensation of it being a very strong bass, even if you're running at a higher torque level. The way it differentiates between all of those forces is my absolute favorite thing about this bass. The 22-bit encoder in here excels in providing all of the details in a very wide spectrum of frequencies. And I'm glad that Asetek did not botch the La Prima just because it sits in the entry-level category. Initial impressions on this bass nearly blew me away as the motor was way too smooth. In the 12 Nm category, this is the smoothest bass I have ever tested. But smoothness isn't everything. After spending quite a lot of time with this bass, I got to know one thing, that this is a horse bred for one thing and one thing only. To provide you with an amazing force feedback quality, but mainly on track. Let me explain. Detail-wise, this is an excellent bass, whether be it on track or rally. But the wheel is too responsive for me in rally titles. I have not seen anyone else complain about this, so it could just be me and how I like things. In rally, I prefer a bit of friction. Even after maxing it out in software and in-game, the response of the motor was still very quick. I tried reducing the slew rate bit by bit all the way to 0.1 Nm per millisecond, but it was of no help. Adjusting the slew rate comes with a trade-off. Reducing it too much can cause the details to be noticeably delayed and extremely squishy, which forced me to use the slew rate at its maximum as I could not compromise with the details. Speaking of which, in RBR, WRC and Dirt Rally 2.0, I felt all of the surface details and the momentum of my car to better understand when is the right time to apply the throttle again for those millisecond gains. For instance, in Dirt Rally 2.0, I choose Taylor Farm Sprint for quick testing the surface frequency, because within a few meters, there is this wooden bridge which serves as a good indicator of the details being squishy or crisp. And rallying with this bass was fun, minus the speed of the motor and friction. Despite that, the sensation of the tires slipping on slush and mud won me over. Now all of this is highly subjective and I eventually got used to it, but I would have still preferred the friction to be a bit higher. In track racing, I love how quickly this bass can react to the signals, because in tarmac, you want all of the grip available, and if slipped, you have to be able to react quickly before severely damaging your car. And in here, I had absolutely no issues with the overall snappiness or responsiveness whatsoever, because I run similar settings and the responsiveness on my Alpha U. In Assetto Corsa and Automobilista 2, I really liked how the movement of the car felt. Every little detail, from curb to grass effects to lateral forces, all of the highs and lows were being delivered in such a refined manner that I started throwing my car around from corner to corner. Although clipping kept on ruining some areas of my laps under heavy cornering. But if you ask someone who plays around 8 to 10 Newton meters of torque, absolutely this bass is going to give you moments of unbridled joy. I know it's starting to feel like I'm praising the La Prima a bit too much. And for all intents and purposes, I am. But like all things in the world, it isn't perfect. If keeping the motor's smoothness and the outstanding force feedback quality aside, my first few hours with this bass were a bit of a head scratcher. And there are two main reasons for that. First one is having a hard time adjusting to the smoothness and friction levels. And second being the faint feeling of road texture and collision feedback. And before you guys jump to any conclusion regarding what I just said, allow me to explain. When I say that the road texture or collision feedback is faint, it does not mean that it lacks those details or is weak by any standards. It's just that there isn't a lot of headroom for those extra dynamic forces when you're playing at 90% of the torque output. Let me tell you what I'm talking about. In Spa, when you approach Eau Rouge and move towards Redillion, my sincerest apologies for butchering the names by the way, you get the sensation of the torque increase dramatically as you start to take the first right-hander and move towards Redillion. And then find the torque levels easing itself off to its average value when moving towards Kemmel Straight. If playing at 10 Newton meters, you only have the headroom for 2 Newton meter for those dynamic forces, and that is not enough to properly provide them. Such is the case with crashes and collisions. If you are going to be playing at, let's say 8 Newton meters, then these forces could be delivered nicely without too much clipping. Now how important are dynamic forces to you? You have to figure it out for yourself. To me, they are very important. I daily drive a SimMagic Alpha U with similar setting and torque levels. So even if I run it at, let's say 10 Newton meters, depending on how much force the game is asking for, I would still have plenty of headroom for those extra forces to be delivered uninterrupted. I'm not saying that a force will peak as high as 23 Newton meters, but even if a corner is demanding a lateral force of 15 Newton meter, it will have that headroom. That cannot be said for La Prima, which is why I said that road and collision effects weren't as strong for my taste. I know that force feedback settings are subjective, but what matters at the end of the day is the time recorded in the lap time counter. I tried my absolute hardest on the La Prima to break my record and fell short by 0.2 of a second. I tried to break it for days. Days, I tell you, and I still could not do it. It could be a skill issue, it could be the advantage I get from the dynamic headroom, I don't know. But I don't want you guys to have a wrong impression of this base, as I'm not pointing out a flaw. I'm just spoiled by dailying a 23 Newton meter base. So what would be the solution then? I would say, based on my preferences, I would either go for the 18 Newton meter Forte, buy the PCB upgrade route for that extra dynamic range, or go with the Invicta once and for all. Though I haven't had the opportunity to test those two, I would love to check them out in the near future to see if my statement stands. But you also have to understand that I'm putting it against a base which is clearly a couple of weight classes above. If I am to talk strictly in the sub 12 Newton meter category, in my honest opinion, I have to say that this is definitely the base. Again, I want to be very clear that you may not even feel what I have felt, because personal preferences and also the fact that most people don't have a bunch of bases in their possession for test purposes. But if this was my first ever direct drive base, I would be very happy. Now let's talk about the software. It's called Race Hub, and like most softwares, what you see is what you get. The UI is quite minimalistic and the welcome page gives off serious racing vibes because of this cool smoke effect. Regarding the pedal adjustment and the LED tab, I will be covering them in a separate video of wheels and pedals, so stay tuned for that. In this video, I want to focus on the settings which affects the behavior of the wheelbase. Let's start with some of the implementations which I found interesting. Starting with the shift sounds. I wasn't sure why this was implemented, so I asked Asetek about it, and I was informed that Kevin Magnussen told them that F1 drivers do not usually rely on RPM lights. They get a beep sound in their ears notifying them when to upshift. I had no idea about this until a few days ago, which tells you more than enough about my knowledge regarding F1. Now, how much earlier this beep is going to intimate you will vary from game to game, as every game and car has a different optimal upshift time. I experimented with different cars and games to see if I could get an average time. In Automobilista 2, I drove the Corvette C8 GTE, which redlines around 7400 RPM. And the beep goes off at 7180 RPM. Which gives you a headroom of 220 RPMs. In Formula Ultimate Gen 2, the red line is at 12,500 RPM and the beep comes at 12,150 RPM. Which gives you a headroom of 350 RPM. Keep this in mind that how quickly the revs rise and how quickly you can hear the sound is going to vary on a few factors such as which gear you are on, what car you are driving, and whether there is an incline or decline on the track. In Assetto Corsa, I drove the Lotus 311 which redlines at 7200 RPM, but the beep goes off at 7100 RPM. Which kind of makes it useless. But in McLaren MP412C GT3, the red line is at 7500 RPM, but I get notified at around 7300 RPM. So like I said, it's going to vary from car to car and game to game. I confirmed this with Asetek too, and they told me that there isn't any fixed average time. I don't play a lot of F1, so I don't know how advantageous it is. If you are an avid F1 player, please enlighten me. Next up is this one-click switch between low torque and high torque mode. It's really convenient whenever my wife wants to play, as it limits the torque output to 8 Newton meters. I know the same can be achieved by creating a separate profile with different torque values and figures, but she hasn't had any issues with my settings, so it comes in handy. Now I know I said no LED stuff in this video, but have a look. I'm not sure how many of you would actually want to sit around admiring these patterns from a distance rather than playing. But if you are one, like me, you will enjoy it. You have a total of 10 patterns to choose from, and it is quite pleasing to look at. Then we have some safety features such as auto centering, which basically recenters your wheel when no games are playing, and it keeps it there so it doesn't violently do something crazy. We also have a safe mode which auto disables the force feedback when not in use. You can choose when it should cut itself off, in case you are stepping away from the rig for a significant amount of time or just spectating after you've had a crash. It could come in handy. Then lastly, we have the hands-off detection. I have seen similar implementation in Moza bases while testing them, and it is a much needed feature if you are someone who lets go of the wheel even for a few seconds. I could not get it to work on Automobilista 2 for some reason. On Assetto Corsa, it worked as intended. Moving on to the settings menu, you get to adjust the slew rate. I haven't seen this in a lot of softwares, and I can tell you that it is useful. You can reduce it to tone down the overall snappiness or responsiveness of the wheelbase to further tune it to your liking. In bases which have no slew rate adjustment, you have damping filters to slow the wheel's movement down. But we will discuss that topic in another video. Now regarding the supported games, there hasn't been native support for more casual games such as Forza Horizon, Crew Motorfest, Expeditions, etc. Yet. I guess if enough people bought expensive DDs to play more casual games, then maybe it will be officially supported. I don't know. But there's always VJoy for you to fiddle around and try to get the base working. With all of this covered, only one question remains. Is it worth it? I guess that's debatable. The La Prima bundle costs €1478 or $1578, which is on the higher side, I suppose. But if you do decide to not include the pedal, then you're dropping down to €1176 or $1255, which is still relatively on the higher side. La Prima also has a Tony Kanaan bundle, and I would say 100% it is worth every penny. There has been some crazy deals on it. People have bought the TK bundle for as low as $300. But I'm not here to give you buyer's advice. I'm here to tell you that this base, and I'm only talking about the base, is an amazing product. For cost reduction purposes, Asetek could have gone with an 18 or even 15-bit encoder and kept the 18 for Forte and 22 for Invicta. But they decided to keep the 22-bit encoder common across all three bases. And that is what I liked about their lineup the most. I'm yet to see how it stands against the test of time, but for now, all I can say that this is definitely a solid contender in the sub 12 Nm category. If keeping the aesthetics aside for a moment, the base is fabulous inside out. It checks most of the boxes. It has great hardware, great software, a nice ecosystem, outstanding force feedback quality, modularity, and transparency. And if you could see exactly why they are charging that sort of money, then maybe you could convince yourself to go get one. But buying or not is your decision to make. Let me know if you agree or disagree with my opinions. Leave a like for Steve the Star and subscribe if you haven't already. Stay tuned for other reviews to follow. I have been Darth Snape, and may the downforce be with you.